The history of the NFL is one of exploitation. Players are often at the whim of the organization. Tom Pascioni has been a fan of professional football for just about 50 years now, and he's watched all sort of absurd drama happen as a result of that strained employer-employee relationship.
The relationship between players and owners was pretty static for a long time in the NFL. It was almost indentured servitude through where you got drafted by a team, and then if you wanted to play football, you played for that team, and then you got paid whatever they paid you, and you didn't really have much choice in the matter.
The NFL wasn't big on player rights. I mean, they didn't have to be. Where else would players go? Canada? There was no other option. I spoke to Satyajit Bose, a professor of economics at Columbia University, about what it would mean for players to only have one place they could work.
A monopoly in general in economics is something evil. It's a situation where only one organization or one company has the right to sell a product. In the old days, there was something called a mine town, right? There'd be a town where there was a mine, and that was the primary employer, and they also ran the schools and ran the hospitals and the local co-op shop and so on. So in that context, you have a single employer, and so workers basically had only one option, or they could move somewhere else. And typically there are costs to moving. People don't want to leave their families, so.
Now, what if there was someone who would pay that movement price? What if the monopoly had competition it couldn't crush? Well, in 1983, the USFL was started in hopes of being that. In Tom's words,
nobody really thought that the USFL was going to be anything other than sort of a minor league, a junior league, for guys that couldn't make it in the NFL. And that was cool. And then in the off season, prior to the 84 NFL draft, they scarfed up other guys.
The USFL was supposed to be a feeder league for the NFL, but they made it very clear in only their second season that they were going to play good football, and good football needed good talent. In the 1982-83 season, Herschel Walker was coming off of one of the best college football seasons in recent memory. He had just won the Heisman Trophy and led his Georgia Bulldogs to their third SEC championship. According to the NFL, he was coming their way.
But the first thing they did was sign Herschel Walker.
Ballou gives the ball to Herschel Walker. Walker finds a hole on the right side. He's outside, and he may be gone. Touchdown, Georgia.
Who had won the Heisman Trophy. And, that was a big splash. The NFL couldn't draft him because he was a junior. So the USFL, they actually didn't draft him either. They just signed him to a personal services contract.
January 10th, another Heisman winner, Mike Rozier, signs with the USFL. He had also won the Maxwell Award, the Walter Camp Award, the Chick Harley Award, and the UPI Player of the Year Award. All of that is to say he was pretty damn good, and he was going to sell a lot of tickets.
But then the big one, in my opinion, the one that really stood out was when they drafted and signed Mike Rozier out of Nebraska, who was also the Heisman Trophy winner the next year. When they signed Rozier, it was a huge statement that they were going to compete for players, and they were going to pay them, and the kind of football they wanted to play was going to, sort of be on par with the level of football with the NFL, and that was really flabbergasting.
And then March 6th came around, and that was the final nail in the coffin. Steve Young, the top quarterback prospect whose electrifying play had nearly won him another Heisman, follows to go to the LA Express. He was expected to be the number one overall pick, but the USFL did all they could to get him.
They signed Steve Young, basically the top quarterback available. And they didn't just sign him to a contract, they signed him to a baffling contract. And the story was not about Steve Young, it was about his contract.
The contract was $43 million over 40 years. That's never been done before then and has never been done since. It was an unprecedented amount of money, and the amount of years was ungodly.
That was unheard of. You know, the top contracts at the time were in the neighborhood of $1 million a year, and for 3 years, 4 years, something like that, because quarterback or football players fall apart. And they signed the guy for freaking 4 decades, and it was like, holy, I don't understand the economics of this.
As Tom said, in the NFL, players' careers don't usually last that long, maybe 10 or 15 years tops, and if they've stayed healthy their entire time. But with those contracts on the table, for once, the players held the power. It wasn't play where you were drafted or don't play at all. No, the players had all the power, and they were milking both leagues dry. The NFL draft is in late April, and a full panic had set in. Cincinnati held the first overall pick from a trade with Tampa, but after striking out on Rozier and Young, they traded the pick to New England. Less than a week later, the Patriots had signed their pick to a contract and had him practicing with the team. The NFL was deflating the suspense on one of its headlining events.
So the hype around the NFL draft in '84, in my opinion, it was extraordinarily anticlimactic. There was very little interest because there weren't any good players. There was no intrigue about who was going to go number 1 or in the top 10 or anything like that, because all the greatest players had been picked out.
The draft came and went, and the hype was not for the returning NFL season. It was for the real start of the USFL. This is where we have to introduce a new character. Back in 1984, Donald Trump wanted to own a sports team. He had zeroed in on the Baltimore Colts in the NFL, but after a rejected bid, Trump started his revenge tour.
First, we have Mr. Donald Trump, who is the visitor from New York City and the New Jersey General's owner. First, as the visitor, Donald, let's welcome you to the community of the USFL, and your intense interest in merchandising, I think, has been striking from the very beginning.
Well, thank you very much, Keith. It's great. I think they have 65,000 people, I just heard, Marvin, so I congratulate you. It's been really fabulous. We're very happy.
I think the general
So
way
why
that
do I
you-
bring up Trump? He is the current president of the United States, and his history with the NFL has really been put to light recently, especially with the Colin Kaepernick fiasco. But no, it's because Trump's introduction changes everything. Before Trump, the USFL made it very clear that they were not competing with the NFL. They had a different season. They made sure they were not fighting that beast, because they would lose. The USFL knew its boundaries. When Trump came, he convinced them that they could fight the NFL. So, after gaining great viewership in their first year, on August 23rd, 1984, the USFL moved its schedule to fall in direct competition with the NFL.
Not to be political, but I have despised Donald Trump since the day he ruined the USFL, because it was his idea to change the business plan and spend wildly in direct competition with the NFL, and then try and play head-to-head against them. And you know, there's documentaries and there's books about exactly what he did, and it's pretty clear that he just lied, just insanely lied to the other USFL owners about having TV contracts in place for the fall that would fund them and other things like that, just so he could get them to move to the fall, because he just really wanted an NFL team.
As expected, the USFL couldn't match up with the NFL's fan base. The new thing was something all fans wanted to keep up with, but it wasn't enough to leave tradition behind. So, in one last middle finger to the USFL, expecting their collapse, the NFL had a supplemental draft on June 5th, 1984. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers had lost their pick to the Cincinnati Bengals in the real '84 draft. But in the supplemental draft, they held the number 1 overall pick, and lucky for them, Steve Young was sitting right there. Steve had been one of the headlining signings of the USFL, but here's what he had to say about the supplemental draft.
Subsequently, there was the supplemental draft, of which you were very much...
I might have to spit if you say that again.
Steve Young went from his $40 million contract to a contract that paid him $5 million over 6 years. This was including a signing bonus. He had lost all his leverage and was now stuck under the rookie wage scale. In a twist of fate, There were 3 players in 3 rounds of the supplemental draft who made the Hall of Fame. In all of the 12 rounds of the 1984 NFL draft, there were no Hall of Famers taken. And just like that, things were back to normal. Players had little to no leverage, an injury could mean a career was over. The NFL was the sole provider of football. Trump and the owners of the USFL later sued for antitrust violations, a case which they actually won. They rode off into the sunset holding their winnings. A collective $3, and the USFL was retired into history.